Welcome to the Information Security Forum podcast. I'm your host, Tavia Gilbert.
Just think about it. Virtually all major IP theft attacks that we've seen start out with a phishing attack. And that puts responsibility squarely on the shoulders of the individual.
That was our guest for today, Dartmouth College Professor of Computer Science, V.S. Subrahmanian. Today, you'll be listening to the second of two episodes featuring ISF Managing Director Steve Durbin speaking with V.S. Today, they'll cover the risks posed by the Internet of Things, cybersecurity awareness for the general public, and more.
You mentioned a couple of really interesting things there I want to go into in a bit more detail. Exposure being one of them and risk being the other. When I look across any organization, they are all interconnected in some way, shape or form. We talk about digital transformation, connectivity, and all of that kind of thing, but it's the reality. And so if you're a CISO trying to, I suppose, get your situational awareness across this entire landscape is becoming increasingly more complex and difficult. And IoT is one of the things for me that really throws the cat amongst the pigeons. Now, you've referenced IoT as a space of emerging and very serious risk. Tell us a little bit about that.
So let me give you some, very simple examples of things I see happening down the pike. So right now in the biomedical space, there are companies looking at developing pills that will auto-dispense dosages of medication at various points in time. Mm-hmm. So think, you go to the doctor today and he says, Steve, I want you to take 2 doses of this pill, one in the morning and one in the evening each day for the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
And, like most people, I will be the first to admit I occasionally miss a dose and forget about it.
Yep.
And everybody does that. Some people miss more doses than others. On the other hand, if you get a pill that you swallow once, which dispenses the doses periodically. Mm-hmm. So think of this as really an electronic gadget,
right?
But with a little, aperture to dose you. Mm-hmm. Then perhaps every morning it's going to send a beep to your phone saying, hey, you're going to have this pill dosage dropped in about 20 minutes. If you don't want me to do that, let me know. And then we can delay it another 20 minutes. Now, if I'm a malicious hacker, I can look at this communication and I can say, maybe I can carry out a ransomware attack on Steve.
Okay.
So think I send a message to your phone using the same app that the pill uses to communicate with the phone. And it alerts you to the fact that you've been hacked. Mm-hmm. And that just to show you that you've been hacked, they're going to show you that they're going to drop a little bit, a very harmless quantity of the medication right now.
Right.
And then they're going to say, well, look, we're going to drop the whole thing in you right now or in the next 1 hour unless you pay up a certain amount of money. So that's the kind of catastrophic outcome. You can see the same thing is potentially possible with, say, oil tankers. Mm-hmm. Instead of dropping medication, if the system has been hacked, a ransomware attack might drop a little bit of oil to point out that the criminal has the capability to do it, but with the threat of releasing the entire load of oil if a certain ransom has not been paid. So IoT, both these examples are IoT examples,
right,
are going to significantly increase the attack surface. Mm-hmm. So that vulnerabilities that the designers of those systems had never imagined are going to be coming up, that the designers of those systems never thought about, and that we, as computer scientists, are going to have to work with the designers of those systems to help protect them better from cyber attack. So this is going to take a village. Computer scientists who are most cybersecurity people are computer scientists today, don't know a whole lot about biomedical devices.
Right.
They don't know a whole lot about the control systems in an oil tanker. And the people who build the control systems, who design the biomedical devices, may not know a whole lot about cybersecurity. So partnerships are going to be needed across disciplinary boundaries to make this happen.
And I suppose the really frightening thing about that is what we're doing is moving, to use your example, a ransomware attack against a corporation, in the instance of an oil tanker, and okay, that's bad enough, to the individual. And I'm just thinking about the whole impact that would have on society, on individuals, the panic. Because the reality is, of course, you don't actually need to even be able to do what you've just suggested. It's just the initial suggestion of that is probably enough.
That's right. I mean, so the very threat that something can happen is a strong deterrent to people adopting, certain things. So at the individual level, I think there have been quite a few individual ransomware attacks targeted at individuals, of course, but none with the kinds of catastrophic consequences.
Right.
So in some sense, if you or I need an artificial heart 5 or 10 years down the road, which I hope does not happen to either of us, but if we were to require an artificial heart or an artificial lung or something like that, we have to worry now about ransomware attacks. And then there's this very difficult question, are you going to put off getting an artificial heart because you're worried about a ransomware attack? My guess is the answer is no. But you would still want as much assurance as possible that you're going to be safe with the artificial heart.
Right.
So I think this is going to raise very significant security questions and also very significant ethical and legal questions and legislative questions for our country.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this is certainly, I suppose, people listening to this will be thinking of the law in California, of course, that says that in IoT devices going forward from 2020, security has to be designed in from the outset. You can't retrofit, again, using your example, security to the sorts of biomedical devices we've just been talking about. They have to be designed in from the beginning, right? So if I understand you correctly, technology is becoming much more pervasive, much more intelligent. We've talked about artificial intelligence. We've talked about the way in which that is changing the whole attacker-defender paradigm, making life more difficult, as always, for the CISO. No change there. But also you've introduced this very concerning, I guess, issue that, cybersecurity is going to migrate away from the enterprise into general society, to individuals. And that really, for me, raises another issue, and that is of the role of the individual in protecting himself, herself. My own view is that has to begin in the schools.
Yes, I think it's got to begin as early as possible.
Right.
And, just think about it. Virtually all major IP theft attacks that we've seen start out with a phishing attack.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And that puts responsibility squarely on the shoulders of the individual. So when an individual gets an email which is too good to be true, or an email, he or she should be able to look at that email and say, is this real or is this a phish?
Right.
All of us are going to get that wrong sometimes.
Of course.
And that's because, and that includes cybersecurity experts, people like you and me.
Yep.
And we're going to get that wrong as well. So nobody's immune from attack, especially as these attacks are getting increasingly sophisticated. You have the spear phishing attacks, which are very, very highly targeted at very specific individuals. Those emails look like they're coming from friends, from professional colleagues. And emails are not the only vector. Your Facebook feed, your Twitter feed, all of these may contain links to URLs. All of these may contain images, which may have hidden executables in them. They may have links to PDF files. So the attacker can throw things at us from many different directions. And we've got to be cognizant of all of those. So I think the individual user is the first line of defense against attacks, whether they're targeted at the individual or at the corporation or corporations that person works for. We've seen that over and over again with the phishing attacks. So I think training is going to have to start probably right at the high school level. I mean, I don't know if you have kids, Steve, but I have teenagers. And, as far as I can tell, they've been very comfortable with iPads, iPhones since they were barely more than toddlers.
Yeah.
And so we've got to start baking it in really early. Most schools in America today say a little bit about things that impact children directly. Don't talk to strangers now has a digital analog, which is don't connect to some strange person on your social platform of choice. But it really should go a lot further than that. They need to understand the risks of different kinds of emails. They need to understand that emails that attempt to extort money from you. So these are the kinds of emails that say, we've seen you in a compromising position. Please send us, a transfer of $400 to a Bitcoin wallet. Those kinds of emails are usually scams, and they don't have anything. And it's just an attempt to intimidate a few people into paying. So kids need to understand that because, I don't think teenagers and 12-year-olds are necessarily savvy enough to recognize the difference between a real threat, a threat which has teeth to it, and a threat that's intended for the purposes of extortion. At the very least, they should be able to recognize the warning signs and go tell their teacher or their parents or some responsible adult. So I think, as a society, our institutions have not done a very good job in educating our kids about cyber risks. I mean, some parents, of course, have done a good job at it, but as a society, we've done a terrible job at that.
How do we improve? What are the sorts of things you think we can do? I mean, you've mentioned that it needs to start in schools, but give me some specifics here about what the sorts of things you'd like to see.
So, I was very impressed when I was in Singapore a few years back.
Okay.
And I was just taking a walk through one of their museums.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a whole room dedicated to cyber education for kids.
Right.
Maybe a 50 by 100-foot room dedicated to kids playing around with devices and seeing the kinds of cyber risks that they might be exposed to. So those might be the kinds of techniques that could be brought to, say, every year a 2-hour refresher course for kids in high school.
Right.
A lot of teachers are uncomfortable with teaching this material because they don't feel they know it well enough.
Right.
Especially high school teachers fully understand their pain. So there should be perhaps a carefully developed set of materials, maybe a movie that the kids can watch maybe once a year. Not the same movie, of course, but an upgraded version every year, age appropriate, which shows them this. And perhaps, there should be a joint effort between government, some private corporations, charitable foundations, all of whom, we all have a vested interest in making sure our kids are safe. So I think as a society, we should be doing more about this.
I agree. V.S., thank you very much for coming in and sharing some of those thoughts. Fascinating insights there into AI, IoT, and, of course, some of the challenges that we face from a societal standpoint. So thanks very much indeed for your time.
Thank you, Steve. It was a pleasure to be here.
That concludes our 2 episodes of conversation with V.S. Subrahmanian and ISF Managing Director Steve Durbin. If you missed the first episode, you can find it on the ISF media page or on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you can catch more valuable conversations with Steve and expert guests. In the meantime, for more podcasts, videocasts, and additional resources for CISOs and anyone looking to enhance the security of their business, please visit securityforum.org. And we'd like to hear from you. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover or someone you'd like us to interview, get in touch through our website or tweet us at Security Forum. Thanks for listening and for rating and reviewing our podcast, and we look forward to being back with you next time.